25 heroes, 15 maps, and a whole lot to complain about. Discussions surrounding the balance in Overwatch have been taking place for as long as I can remember. It seems like there are two different factions involved. Those who suggest with their in-depth discussions that there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the depth in Overwatch, and those who say it's rather shallow and easy to play. Now that really shouldn't and likely doesn't surprise anybody. Easy to get into and difficult to master has been a cornerstone in Blizzard's development for a very long time now. Obviously, it's always easy to dismiss a game with the claim that it lacks depth when you either don't care to play it or don't care to think further and give it a chance to show what it has to offer. But even so, do the claims hold true? Is Overwatch ultimately lacking depth in its gameplay? I mean, on the surface it really is rather simplistic. You have a dude that seems pretty overpowered until you realize that there are a few other dudes that are supposed to make this dude's life pretty miserable. It's a simple rock, paper, scissors type situation where some heroes were designed with the intent of exceeding at something in particular, but also with deliberate weaknesses that other heroes can exploit. It is not a very difficult concept to get behind. Overwatch doesn't care for anything like different loadouts, weapon variations, or modifications that would alter the way you play their heroes. Every character is supposed to be immediately recognizable so that everyone always knows what exactly to expect from that particular player on that specific hero. But if the argument is that variety creates gameplay depth, then Overwatch has plenty of that. Every match plays out very differently depending on which heroes you choose, which heroes your teammates choose, and what kind of team composition the enemies throw at you. There are maps that favor certain heroes over others, and obviously we also have to consider individual skill of each player involved, as also the degree to which the players in question decide to or refuse to work together. You might be right in your assessment that every McCree player is going to try to do the same thing, which is shooting the enemies in the face, so you don't have a lot of variety between McCree players next to their level of proficiency that they display at this hero. But there is unbeatable variety in the cast of heroes itself, where no character plays like any other to an extent where it's almost like you play another game entirely. But I know, the argument is not solely directed at variety. Realistically speaking, most players have no interest in playing the vast majority of characters available to them, and that is honestly a shame given that this game is all about versatility, but that's another story entirely. When players discuss the lack of depth in Overwatch, they mean the lack of mastery involved in the gameplay itself. There's only so much you can do as an individual player in a game that was designed with team play to such an extent that a single player not playing properly can easily make you lose a match with no fault of your own whatsoever. But it is that team reliance that players use as an excuse way too often. Let's talk about ranked here for a second. Players are under the impression that they have very quickly figured out what the game is about and that they do everything right, and the only reason they can't rank up is because of their teammates. Reality is, however, that if you are stuck in gold, you have only scratched the surface of gameplay mastery, and by that, the game's depth itself. There's no rank in this game that is impossible to get out of. If you can't get out of gold, that means that you are a gold ranked player that doesn't understand what he has to get better at to keep ranking up. And that principle applies all the way into Grandmaster. As much as people like to claim that lower ranks are worse when it comes to trolls and throwers, you only say that because you haven't seen that players up in Master and GM deal with the exact same problems. The frequency at which you encounter these things is entirely random, and your individual experience is by all means not representative of your division as a whole. There are days where I will lose every single match in Masters because of a very unfortunate chain of events. Sometimes I go for a week without ever progressing my rating, then other days the opposite occurs. It is entirely random. So what is there to learn in Overwatch as an individual player that would support my hypothesis? Well, to start things off on the most basic level, you obviously have hero mastery, and that times 25, or well, times however many heroes we have at the time of you watching this video. And hero mastery is not something you stomp through in a day. Every hero plays inherently differently, and learning what makes some heroes more useful in some situations over others is gonna take some time. There might not be an AI that you have to kill or currency you have to collect, but there are different maps with different strong points that you have to take control of. Control that some heroes can achieve more easily than others. Learning which heroes are strong picks for any given map is something that only experience will teach you. Another very time-intensive layer of gameplay depth. Wanna talk team composition next? Because that sure is a very crucial part of the game. It challenges your adaptability, because as much as you learning which heroes are favorable picks for any given map is very helpful, the reality looks a little bit different. Your matches will challenge you to be adaptive given the heroes your enemies choose, as also given the heroes that your teammates are good at. The reality of an actual ranked match is not ideal. It rarely ever is. More often than not, you have to deal with compromises. Heroes that may be suboptimal, but you still have to work with them because the player in question either is not good at any of the heroes you want them to be good at, or they refuse to swap altogether. We're talking about thinking and acting in a very adaptive manner, rather than accessing static information you'll learn prior to queuing up for a match. match, and that is quite the skill to have. I've read a lot of arguments about other games having more depth than Overwatch, which in itself doesn't necessarily support the claim that Overwatch has too little, but what I want to differentiate here is depth simply for the sake of adding barriers to a player's ability to get better, and depth that is inherent to the gameplay. As it stands, everything you have to get better at in Overwatch is tied to the core gameplay experience. Everything that makes a player truly skillful evolves around the idea of either hero mastery or adaptability. There are cases where players aren't interested in engaging with a game further because they don't think the depth the game provides is really engaging in itself. For example, if a game requires you to read 400 pages worth of manuals to learn every item in existence and explain different points of interest on the map, then that is a very artificial way of making your game more complicated. It is nothing but a barrier in place to add more depth for the sake of adding depth. Contrary to that, everything I mentioned earlier when it comes to the depth provided in Overwatch is something you can learn simply by playing the game, and that in a very reasonable amount of time. There are no artificial barriers placed in front of the player that gate their progression, and that can be as much of a good thing as it can be a bad thing. Gating mechanisms help to draw a very clear line between players of varying skill levels as also varying levels of dedication. Only those who are truly dedicated to the game will be able to reach a high rank by overcoming these barriers. Lacking such gating mechanisms means that it blurs the line between players, their skill levels, and their levels of dedication. That, as evident to anyone who did spend a significant amount of time playing on ladder, can create a lot of very frustrating experiences. So it's not like one is necessarily worse than the other in the grand scheme of things. I, as many other players, hate artificial complexity. I absolutely despise the act of adding layers of depth to the game just so the developer can call it difficult, when in reality it just makes the game way more annoying to so many players. But on the other side of that coin, it is something that just as many players are interested in. They love the idea of min-maxing, the idea of knowing all, and the idea of the game rewarding them for their dedication and time investment without having to be particularly creative themselves. Overwatch rewards players for being aware of what is going on, seeing their own mistakes, fixing them, and learning how to get better without the help of a grimoire or a sufficient tutorial, really. The reason it's so difficult to make tutorials based on positioning for Overwatch, when good positioning is a very inherent skill for a good player, is because good positioning is based on a player's adaptability, and nobody can teach you that. Sure, I can tell you that in this particular match I decided to position myself in a specific way because of thing X, Y, and Z, but what you have to learn is to spot thing X, Y, and Z yourself and then make decisions on the fly as to what is the smartest move from there on out. And that is the type of depth we are talking about, very experience based with a lot of trial and error and no clear-cut 100% perfect way of doing things. Creative thinkers who adapt quickly have a way easier time getting better at this game and seeing the layers of depth than someone whose previous instructions were limited to pick up this gun and shoot every other guy you see in the face with it. Overwatch does not hold your hand, and that because it doesn't have to. Everything you need to know to just pick up the game and have fun is very apparent, very easy to understand. But everything surrounding the idea of becoming a truly skillful player in a competitive environment, that's where the complexity lies. There are so many things you have to be good at to be truly skillful and perform well consistently, it's kind of ridiculous. But of course, most of these things don't matter to the average player. You don't have to know any of these things unless you are truly invested in the competitive aspect of the game. And boy, let me tell you, that is a whole different world of frustration that we are dealing with. But that's another topic for another day. Bottom line is that yes, in a casual sense, Overwatch is not very difficult to play and there is not a lot of depth to explore. That's kind of the point. The ability to be able to just pick up the game, have fun, and simply not have to worry. In a competitive sense, there's a lot that goes into making someone really good at this game, and most of the complaints I heard from people were uttered in a very dismissive manner, finger-pointingly blaming others for their own lack of skill and their own lack of willingness to explore the game's depth. Hey, you know what, if you're not in GM, then maybe, just maybe, you're not good enough for that rank, but hey, it's always easier to blame your teammates and the game itself than your own incompetence. But this is me done for the day as I discuss the depth and gameplay in Overwatch. If you enjoyed this video, then do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out. Subscribe if you want to see more, and hey, if you really do want to see more, then why not check out my video where I talked about the idea of a hard MMR reset and why it ultimately wouldn't fix anything. Have a wonderful day you all, and I hope to see you all next time.